Do you ever feel like water is crawling into every tiny cut and pore in your body? And anyone who ever drank or spit or peed that water is still stuck in it? And now they're stuck in you and you can't get away because the faster you try to run, the thirstier you get. And as soon as you stop for a drink of water, it starts all over again.
I hope you don't feel that way because that sounds terrible. But that's what life is like for Elena in The Case of Elena and All That Went Wrong, which is a book that I wrote. I'm Aprille Clarke, and today I'm going to tell you a little bit about that book, where you can get it and answer some questions that I've had people ask.
So, what kind of book is this anyway?
You might call it magical realism or surrealism, or it might even verge a little bit into science fiction.
Is it more like dragon sci-fi or fantasy, or like alien sci-fi?
Neither. It's about people who have unusual situations, unusual circumstances, sometimes even superhero-like powers, but they live in the real world with the rest of us, and their challenge lies in negotiating those unusual circumstances while living with the rest of us here and having human relationships. I had an early reader compare it to the work of Charlie Kaufman, which is not something I had in mind when I was writing it, but I think that's a very kind comparison. I loved the movie Being John Malkovich, and I think my writing has some kind of similarities to that, some of the surrealism, bizarre things happening, but also with a sense of absurdity and humor along the way.
So it's about someone named Elena?
Yes, but it's also about a lot of other people. For example, the first chapter is called The Case of Claire, the Reverse Kangaroo, and that one focuses on Claire, who is Elena's mother. Whenever she feels stressed or overwhelmed, everything around her slows down and stops. Like clocks stop, the wind stops, everything stops. I didn't come up with this concept. It's been in writing before, but in Claire's case, it's something that she's had to deal with her whole life, and she finally is kind of figuring out how to handle it until once it happens at work, and there's her coworker Brad just running around with her, and she has to babysit him through it. It puts her in a new role of having to caretake him through that situation, and it also examines her own literal child, Elena, and her relationship with her.
What is a reverse kangaroo?
That's a biological concept I heard about in which tiny, tiny baby kangaroos, when they first make their way to their mother's pouches, and they're really still practically embryonic, if circumstances are challenging for some reason, like if there's a drought or a wildfire or there's not enough nutrition available, they can just pause their gestation. They can just stop and wait until things are better and then grow more. So I thought Claire is kind of a reverse kangaroo because she doesn't stop her own development when things get bad. She stops everything else and lets herself sort things out before things turn back on again. So she is a reverse kangaroo.
So it's about Claire too.
Yes, it is. It's also about Jason and Belinda and Terrence and Renee and a whole bunch of other people. Each chapter focuses on a different character's story.
Oh, I get it. It's like a short story collection.
Yes, in a way it is. Each chapter could stand alone, but a lot of the plot lines and characters overlap between the stories. For example, there's a story in which Renee and Terrence, whom I mentioned earlier, are having a conversation. Renee is sure that in her childhood, she met a time traveler and actually lived with that time traveler for a while. She's trying to explain this to Terrence, and Terrence is just not responding in a way that Renee feels is really listening to her. And Terrence feels like Renee completely missed the point of this relationship she had with the time traveler. So their challenging communication is the crux of that story. But then later, in another chapter, we hear the story of Mildred, the time traveler herself, and we find out from her perspective what it was like to go through it. When you read those two stories together, you learn more about them than you would have just reading them separately. Again, I didn't invent this concept. Two books that really inspired me in this area are Jennifer Egan's A Visit from the Goon Squad and Junot Diaz's This Is How You Lose Her. They used that format, and I thought it was so cool and such a rich and potentially interesting way to explore characters and stories.
How do I get it?
The book is coming out from Moonfire Publishing, we think in February of 2022. You should be able to buy it on Amazon, on bookshop.org, and I hope many independent bookstores as well. I'll be updating my social media with all the details as they become available. You can also visit my website at aprilclarke.com, and you have to spell it correctly because, like much of my life, my spelling is a little surreal. Thank you for taking the time to watch this, and I really hope you get a chance to read the book, and please do let me know what you think about it. Goodbye.